Hi guys, welcome to Pixel Affair. It's Kobe here, and in today's video we are going to do this. So this is a soft rock. You can see it's a deflated text which later inflates, bounces, and now turns into rock and falls down and disappears. Right. So this was something that was done by Thomas Burton using Cinema 4D. Right. And I got this message in my Instagram DM. So if I show my Instagram DM, I got this message from Bianca asking me how I'll do this effect. He sent me this link, and when I clicked on it, it was this particular effect and was asking how he would do this in Cinema 4D. So let's actually get into Cinema 4D and how we will create this effect. So I'm in Cinema 4D. I'm using the latest version of Cinema 4D, but what I'm going to show can literally be done in almost every version of Cinema 4D, right? So let's go ahead and create our text. So I'll come in here and I'll bring in our text object. I'll type in the letter, the word soft, right? So SOFT for soft, and I'll change that. I'll middle align it, right? And maybe I'll change the font to something a bit, let's say this Roboto Condense. It can be any text of your choice though. So I'll make it bold a little, and now I'll maybe the horizontal space now make it get close, but I don't want the T and the F to intersect. So if I come here, you can see you have kerning. If I check kerning here, I can select the T and move it so that it doesn't intersect each other, right? So let's assume this is our text and you are fine, everything is okay with it, right? The next thing is how to subdivide our text, and you are going to use soft body on this one. You can actually use the new version of Cinema 4D's plot system, but since I want this one to be done in almost every version, we are going to use the old soft body bullet system. So let's first of all change our display to garage shading. You can see we don't have enough segments, and when you are dealing with the old soft body bullet system, you make sure you don't have a lot of segments. So that's what you are going to do. So in Cinema 4D, from I think R26 upwards, there's this subdivision remesh object that we have. So I can actually use the remesh and I'll make our text a child of the remesh, and you can see it's actually breaking our text down into it. I'll come in here and I'll change polygon count, and I'll probably do it something like 210. And I like this subdivision and everything, right? But if you don't have the remesh, what you can also do is you can select the text, come into the caps, and you can use the old format, change the type from Engon to regular grade, but make sure your grades size are quite big. So maybe 15 here. Come back into the object and make sure, in this case, make sure quad its dominant is checked. So quad dominant, maybe 15 is too much. I'll probably do it 12. I think 12 is fine. Then you come into your intermediate point, change it from adaptive to subdivide, and maybe make that one to like 20, so that you don't have a lot of segments and stuff in there. Maybe the subdivision in here, you can make it like probably 1, right? And this one to give you fair subdivision, but then it doesn't give it as smooth as the remesh, but it also works. So let's go back into our default, the way everything were initially. So we are going to use the remesher, but if you are using an older version which doesn't have the remesher, you can also use this particular technique, right? So now let me enable the remesher, and you can see it's broken our text down for us in this way. So now let's actually go ahead and put it in a subdivision surface. So I'll put it in the subdivision surface, and you can see it has made it soft for us, right? We can actually make sure in the subdivision surface, the subdivision viewport, set it to 1. I mean, all of them set it to 1. And now we have our text object. Let's assume this is the text object you are going to use to work. So you can see in the original video, it starts as a deflated text and now it inflates, right? So that's what you are going to use the soft body to simulate. So I'll hold Control, click and drag this subdivision surface, and I'll hide this one by clicking on these dots to turn red. Then I'll hide the original one. Now if I press C or come down here and press this particular button, and see it make our text editable, right? So now I'll bring down my text. I'll delete this null, and I'll actually what I want to do is I want to change the arrangement of the text. So I'll actually select the T, F, then the T, and now come to the front view, and maybe move it somewhere here. So I want it to look like, so SOFT somewhere like this, and I'll bring all of them in the middle, right? So this is our text that you are actually going to deflate, and it's the same text that you are going to inflate as well. Another thing we have to do is this is not important, but because of gravity, I want to turn our text down. So let me create a floor. I'll create a plane which will be my floor. I'll make it big. So this is our floor, right? And I want the text to be on the floor. So I'll select all of them and rotate 90 degrees, and I'll bring it up. So this is how our text is going to be on the floor, right? So now that we are done with this, let's go ahead and start adding our simulation tags. We should make sure it doesn't intersect with the floor, which is also another important thing. So maybe I'll either select all of the text and I'll move them up a bit. I think it doesn't intersect now. And now if I right click on my plane, I can come to the bullet tags. If you are using an older version, it will be in the simulation tags, but if you are using a newer version from, I think, R26 supports, it will be in the bullet tags. So in the bullet tags, I'll choose collider body, and with this, in fact, let me select all of these and I'll make them one object. So I right click on them and I'll come to connect object plus delete, and you can see it's connected all of our meshes into one. All right, so I'll right click on it and I'll come into the bullet tags again and I'll choose soft body, right? So now if I hit play, it's quite slow, so you can see our text is falling and deflating, right? But I want it to be flatter than it is. So I'll go back and I'll actually select in the soft body tag, come into the soft body tab, and I'll make sure the structural is set to 0 and even the shear is also set to 0. And now if I hit play, it should be even flatter, way flatter. Right, so we want to set that's going to be our initial state, how our text starts, right? So now that maybe let's assume this is how we want it to start from frame 0, right? Let's pause it and now right click on the text and come to current state to object, right? If you right click on the text, you can see all this, or you can simply select, come to object tags, and you can see you have current state to object. So when you click on it, you can see it has created another copy down here, right? So I'll call this one deflated. So what has happened is that, let me hide this, it has created another copy for us, and that one, this is the initial state, the deflated form. So let's delete the tag on the deflated object, right? And now let's hide it. And now if we go back, to restart again, and now in this time we don't want to deflate, we want it to inflate, right? So I'll bring back the structure and the shear, and the shear to everything to default. And now I'll come down to pressure, where it says pressure. I increase the pressure to like probably 5. And what the pressure is going to do is sort of inflate it, right? Like giving some sort of air into our object. So if I hit play, you can see it inflating our text. So let's assume the way it has inflated it till this point, we are cool with it. So the same thing, I'll select the object, come to the object tab here, and I'll choose current state to objects, right? And you can see it has created another copy. So I'll call this one inflated. Right, and now I'll delete the tag on the inflated again. Right, so now we have our first state, how it starts and how it ends. Now we don't need this, all of these, we can actually delete them, but for now I'll hide them. So I'll click on these dots to make them turn red to hide them. Then I'll select the soft body tag, come to the dynamics, and I'll choose make sure the enable is unchecked. So now these are the two objects you are going to work with, the inflated and the deflated. So I can create a null and put all of these in a null to hide them. We don't necessarily even need them. So I can even hide them. So these are the two objects we are going to work with, inflated and the deflated, right? So how do we make the deflated or the inflated transform from one another itself to one another? I mean, so let's actually use the inflated, right? It could be any of them. So I'll hide the deflated. We don't necessarily need it. And I'll right click on the inflated, come to our tags, right? And I'll choose Regen tag. In the Regen tag, I'll choose post morph, right? Or you can simply type Shift C and type in post morph, and you can see you have it here. So if you select your object and click on the post morph, it will apply. Double click on it. So we have our post morph applied to our inflated text, right? And now we want it to, this is our initial state. So if you go into the post morph and in the attributes, we make sure we check points, right? If we check points, you can see it creates this tab for us, which it tells us this is the base post. So the base post is its original post, and this is post 0. So the post that we want our inflated text to be in, right? So I will delete this post 0, and we want our inflated text from its base post to be like the deflated one. So we select in here, we drag in the deflated objects, and you choose yes, and you can see now it has actually taken the shape of the deflated objects. And this is working because they all have the same point, right? It was all made from this the same text object, so it has the same point at the same places, so it works perfectly. So now if I come into the post morph, and now you can see down here, if I see, you can now transform from deflated to inflated, right? So the mode, you should make sure after this is the edit mode. After it's done, you should make sure it's set to animated mode, and this is where if you want to animate, you animate it, right? So you can see our first post is deflated, and I have a whole tutorial on post morph here in Cinema 4D, which you can actually watch for a bit more details. So now that we have our states, right, how do we animate it? And you can see we don't want it to all come in at once. We want it to come in maybe from one side or the other side, right? So that's where we probably need fields. So to use fields, it means you have to use a deformer, right? So how do we use the deformer? And I have a tutorial too on this deformer, which is the Morph deformer. So I'll come into my deformers and I'll choose Morph deformer down here, right? And I'll make it a child of the inflated object. So in the Morph deformer, if I come to the object tab, you can see the post morph is already in there, and that's because I had the post morph selected before creating the Morph deformer. If you create and you don't have the post morph in there, you can simply drag and drop in the post morph, and now you can control the post morph from the Morph deformer within the Morph deformer, right? So now everything is working. So this is where it gives us control for us to be able to use fields. So now if I select the post morph, come to the fields tab and use linear field, and now let me make it a little bit smaller, and you can see I can now animate it, and now it grows from one side to the other. So this is basically the trick to this whole thing, right? So not to do exactly his animation, but I'll select the post morph probably from here, and so we are going to animate it from, let's say, from here to here, right? So let's actually go ahead and do that. So at frame 0, I'll set a keyframe. Let me actually do it from the top view so that we see what you're doing. So at frame 0, I'll set a keyframe here, right? Select the linear field, come to its coordinates. I'll set a keyframe at frame 0 on the position, and at frame maybe 35, I'll drag it to down here, and I'll set keyframes again. All right, so we have our text deflating, coming in deflated and inflating. So that's all that we needed. Now you can see everything. Let me actually take off the shading to garage shading, and let me hide our linear field as well. So everything is fine, but if you play, it looks too stiff. It doesn't give you the soft feel, and with that we are going to use the almighty jiggle deformer, which also I have tutorial on that as well. So I'll come down into the deformers and I'll choose jiggle, and I'll make it a child of the inflated as well after the post morph. And now if I hit play, and see, it gives us the softness feel and everything. If you want it even more softer or how rigid, you can actually come in here and play with the stiffness and all of those things and all of them, right? So let's assume now we have our object from deflation to inflation, right? The next thing is to actually use if you watch the original video, the text bounces, right? So with that, we are going to use another deformer, and the deformer we are going to use, it looks like a scratching and stretching, but scratching and stretching. So we are going to use the scratch and stretch, even though you can use the bold deformer, but this one looks like more of a scratch and stretch. So I'll create a scratch and stretch deformer, and I'll make it, put it in between the morph and the jiggle, right? You will disable the jiggle for now, and now let's hit play. So after the thing has inflated, maybe at frame 40, you set the scratch and stretch. Now with the scratch and stretch, you have to set it up. So if I come into my, you can see, let me actually turn, you can see the scratch and stretch, it has some tiny like line here. So this should be at the bottom of your object, and this one should be at the top, right? So you have to align it. So maybe I'll select the scratch and stretch, and I'll rotate it to make sure it aligns with my text. If I come to the front view, you can see it's not aligning. So this is the, if I select this scratch and stretch and come to the object tab, to make sure the the bottom is actually set here, somewhere here, and the top, we should move it somewhere here. So this is our top, and now if we go to the factor and see, it's stretching it, right? We can actually move our middle where we want it. So it's, everything is fine. So after the thing has actually inflated, right, the factor, let's set the factor to 100, which is the default. We make it from frame 40, we set a keyframe at 100. We make it squash first, maybe squash first, right, and maybe stretch, and now it stops, right? So let's see the animation that we have. So maybe, so basically this is animation, right? And now we can enable the jiggle deformer. Anytime you are doing animation or anything, you should make sure the jiggle deformer is turned. Of course, it does calculation after the animation. So if it's on, you might not see your animation working properly. So now after everything is done, now if we enable and hit play, you can see now the squash and the jiggle deformer is also doing its thing, right? You can actually come into the jiggle deformer, probably reduce the stiffness, get a little bit of wrinkleness in the our object or our text. So this is basically how you do something like this using the deformers, and you can go ahead and play with your jiggle deformer and all of that to get this feel, whatever feel you want. So after you are fine with the animation, maybe let's increase the frames for our jiggle to settle. So maybe the jiggle settle at frame 130, right? After we are done with everything, what you can do is now in the jiggle, because it's a dynamic object, literally we can cache it because it does calculation. So if you come to the cache tab, you can now hit on calculate, and now you do the calculation so that you can actually scrub through a timeline. Because if it's not cached, you can't actually do the scrubbing to see how the jiggle is going, right? So now that everything is cached, how do we get our object to sort of break down into rocks, right, after it has done everything? And that's basically using a Cinema 4D come to Mograph, the polynomial fracture. So I'll bring in the Deformer fracture, I'll put the inflicted object in the Voronoi fracture. You can see it's fracturing our object. Everything will work within the Voronoi fracture, right? See, it's working and everything, but we don't want it to start working right from here. We want it to start working maybe from after frame 130, because that's where the cache everything is done. So I'll increase our frame to like 200 or even more. All right, so after frame 130, so I'll select my Voronoi fracture and I'll disable it. I'll play, and after frame 130, I'll now come into the basic tab. I'll make sure you see it's disabled, right? So I'll set a keyframe, the disable, and at frame 131, I'll enable it, and I'll set a keyframe. So now if I hit play, everything is fine, and now the Voronoi fracture has taken over. So I'll increase the number of fracture to probably 200, right? And now if I hit play, right click on the Voronoi fracture simulation bullet tags, and I add a rigid body to it, hit play, everything is done, and I can see it's 10 rocks and it has fallen, right? So that's basically how we will do that. So let me actually bring my floor. This is the floor. Let me hide this so that you can see the floor. I'll drag the floor downwards a bit, somewhere here. I'll go ahead and hide it. So now if you hit play again, everything to play. I mean, when it comes to the timing and everything, you might need to have to play to get to how you want it. So you can see it's now falling, right? And now the dynamics has also taken over, right? And this one, it's being pushed down because of the gravity. So if you want to change the gravity, you can use your own default gravity, or you can create a second gravity which will pull it down. So let's assume now in our scene, even though this is the down, but the way we've arranged our text, we want our text going this particular on the y-axis should be our downwards. So now let's create a new gravity object to affect our text, make it go on the y-axis downwards. So now I'll come into my simulate forces and I'll create gravity, and you can see the gravity is pointing down. If you check, you can see it's pointing downwards, right? So we want it to point on the y, so I simply rotate it to 90 somewhere here, and now I'll set a keyframe. I'll not set a keyframe here. I hit play, and at frame 130 you can see now it's pushing our text down. But because this is a gravity we've created, you can actually use field to control it. So I can use linear field, and I'll set it. I'll change the angle, the direction to y. I'll make it smaller, and now I'll push it somewhere down, and let's see what we have. If we hit play, you can see our text falls down, and now we can start setting our keyframe from 140 on the y, and maybe at frame 160. We want this gravity to affect all our objects, right? So I'll drag the linear upwards. If I hit play again, so in fact, let's increase the gravity of the strength of this gravity. So I'll come into select the gravity, come to the object tab, and I'll increase it to like probably 1002, so that will be a bit stronger. And now if you hit play, after it falls down, and now the linear field is passing, you can see now it's dragging our object downwards. Or we can use another collider object to actually push it. It could be any how you want it, right? If you don't want to use the gravity, this thing to do it. So let's assume this is our camera angle. You can see everything is working fine. Zoom, everything falls, and now it's being pushed down, right? If you don't want to use the how do you call it, the gravity as well, you can also create something like a cube here, right? And I'll move it up somewhere here, and let's say I'll set keyframe from Y. No, I mean I'll set a keyframe in the Z, and I'll push it. So this one is going to push our object away, right? And I'll make it simulation bullet tags, and I'll make it collider object, right? I'll make it even come to name, so it starts from 140, and now I'll hide it. Oh, we want it to push it, but we don't necessarily want it to show. So if I hit play, let me go down. See false, and now I see our cube is pushing it away. It could be anyhow you want it. You can play around with all sort of form to get your object to work. Either of them that works for you. But I kind of like the gravity one. Like I come in the Voronoi object. Now make sure colorized fragment is not on, and now you can. So when it comes to texturing of the Voronoi and everything, I also have a tutorial here about the Voronoi fracture, which you can see how you actually texture the outside and the inside of a Voronoi and everything also in here. So literally, this is basic Cinema 4D stuff. You have to combine several things, and now you'll be able to create this particular effect. I hope this was useful and you learned something from this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.